Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Gregor Snedden, and I'm the Secretary General of the IFA, and I'm here at the World Health Assembly at the the WHO Building M here in Geneva, hosting today's session. And it's my pleasure to host today's Global Cafe on financing the workforce and the longevity economy. Now, to begin today's session, I'm pleased to introduce our guest, Ms. Shruti Singh, a senior economist at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Shruti leads the OECD's work on aging and employment policies, advising governments and employers on adapting labor markets to demographic change and increased longevity. She has led major initiatives on active aging, multi-generational workforces, and longevity readiness, with her research featured in outlets including the Financial Times, Forbes, and the Journal of the Economics of Aging. So please welcome Shruti to the IFA Global Cafe.
Good afternoon from Paris, Gregor. It's really a great pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in, and I we have actually a couple of features on this Global Cafe this week, which we'll share in a minute. But maybe just to kind of set the scene here a little bit. You've said that aging is not simply a retirement issue, but a workforce transformation issue. What do you think most policymakers and employers are still fundamentally misunderstanding about longevity?
Thanks, Gregor. I think before I dive in, let me just say that the OECD is an international organization. As many of you know, we have 38 member countries and hoping to exceed more. We're basically essentially covering Europe and the developed world, which is a little bit different, I think, from the clientele of you all here in this call in the IFA. So that essentially includes, North America, Australia, some parts of South America, and mainly Europe and Japan and South Korea. And so that's just a bit of a background in terms of what the OECD landscape is. Most of Europe, as you know, has already aged, and other parts of
Mhm.
the OECD have also aged very rapidly, looking at countries like Japan and South Korea, especially. We've got a few younger countries in among our members, the Latin Americans, but they're also soon set to be aging very, very rapidly. So the topic of demographic change is of utmost, priority to our member countries, and we've done a lot of work to support members on how to help them navigate these enormous structural shifts. And I think this kind of brings me into the question that you're saying that it's not just a retirement dependency issue. We're talking about significant structural transformations in the labor market and the way we live, the way we work, and how work is designed. And so there's a lot of misconceptions around how we talk about the topic. I mean, just to sort of go through a little bit about how the scale of these structural shifts, we've done some analysis very recently that came out last year in our flagship publication, which basically showed that the OECD projects for the working age population to decline on average in the OECD around 8%, but as large as 30% in countries like Korea, for instance. So imagine living in a world where a third of the working age population, and we've got to produce with a third less that we have. And this is also going to have significant consequences on our living standards. So unless we change our institutions, our narratives, our policy actions, we also project that for the GDP per capita will decline by around 40% between now and the next 30 years. And so it doesn't only fundamentally changes the labor supply, but it's also about skills and experience. And the problem is that systems are still very much fixed around education early on, and you've got a period where you learn, and there's a fixed period when you work and how you work, and then there's a retirement period. So we need to be moving away from these sort of fixed notions to a lot more dynamic life course perspective, given that on one hand, we have a situation where a significant reduction in our working age populations. But also at the same time, people are living much longer than before, which I think often is seen as a drag, but it presents lots of opportunities to both workers in terms of how much they can contribute, but also to business and policymakers in terms of how we design our policies.
Yeah, and to frame that as well, I mean, our pension systems are in fact indeed our whole economic system was built at a time when we had 7 to 8 workers per retired person. So building our retirement policy and the way we designed our economic system is a very different age when we're moving now towards even less than two working people per older person. I mean, that's when we talk about, quote, quote, burden, economic burden, and also the opportunity that we talk about OECD promotes the idea that by extending workforce or investment in an older workforce could move, the statistic that I read could move GDP forward by up to 20% per capita by extending and really working with that workforce,
That
even overcoming roughly the burden of that retired population.
that's right, Gregor. And I think again, there's also a misconception around the fact that we're talking about a minority. It's basically a hugely growing part of the population. And we actually, more than ever before, something to celebrate is that we have more older workers participating in the labor market activity more than ever before. And so we're talking about huge rises, in countries around 20 percentage points, where only 20, 30 years ago, we only had half of 50% around older peoples in the age group of 55 to 64 being active in the labor market, whereas we're looking at around 70%, 75% in countries like New Zealand, Iceland, and Japan. So enormous successes, in some ways that actually it's a group that's, it's already there. It's not a marginal
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
group, and it's not so, I think again it's about conceptions that, there's a lot of stereotypes around how we talk about older individuals.
Yeah, our narrative and we're not because of that narrative, we're not seeing it's actually tremendous opportunity. We always are presenting it as this burden and concern, but which we do have to be mindful of, but we're ignoring the fact that this is also a tremendous opportunity from an economic perspective. Now, you just launched the OECD Longevity Readiness Tool with our good friends at AARP. And in fact, we've got a video here queued up. So maybe we can show the video now and then you can tell us about it. Wow, very cool. That's awesome. So I think Berenice is going to pop the link in the chat so people can check out the tool. But why don't you kind of t tell us about it?
Well, I see Jeff is in the call, our good colleague and partner in this initiative, which actually is a result of several years of work that we've done together. Um, the journey really started from the point that while there's a lot of research and focus on in terms of what governments can be doing, again, a lot of focus on pension policies, labor market systems, the reality is that most of the change or action, it's actually happening at the workplace level. And there had been very little research around what can employers, the private sector, can be doing in leading that change, and what do these policies actually really look like, and where are the gaps? And so we started on a journey about 5, 6 years ago, and produced several reports around promoting an age-inclusive workforce, where we presented the business case around retaining older individuals in the workforce, and so on and so forth. And rather than sort of, keeping all that knowledge that we'd built and research in publications, we wanted to draw on that and tap into that and actually create something that is implementable and actionable for companies. And so draws, the tool itself, basically is an evidence-based tool designed to help employers understand how ready they are for these demographic shifts that we've just been talking about, Greg. So it looks at four dimensions, as you just saw. It looks at the role of job quality. So, do we have systems at the workplace that are going to help people, help people from getting sick, or if they do get sick, what we can do about it? Are we actually upskilling the upskilling our workforce? To what extent are there career progression opportunities for the workforce? So it really allows sort of human resources, businesses, CEOs, but also governments to sort of see how ready they are on all these that all these things collectively really make a difference in terms of retaining older individuals. And it's the first tool that's internationally comparable, the data across enormous amount of sectors. We've got 30 countries in it, and so we're really proud of it, as you can imagine, and we just sincerely hope. And thanks for sharing the video. We want to get the word out, and we really want employers to be using it.
Awesome. Well, why don't we just quickly touch on those four areas? So you mentioned job quality. Maybe just take us through some of the training, recruitment and retention, health and safety are the other three. Maybe just give us the helicopter tour there.
Yeah, so essentially, we boil down to four areas that have shown to be effective in terms of retention, engagement, and improving the productivity of older individuals, which is, by the way, a key issue, as we know, around stereotypes around how productive older people are.
Uh,
And so consistently, evidence shows that if we're able to sort of, tick mark and, get sort of the different policies right in all these dimensions, we can essentially not only motivate people, but also they can be good for business and government. So, in terms of job quality, we're talking things like flexibility. I mean, no
mhm.
rocket science here. We know that it's a win-win for individuals, whether you're young or old. A family taking care of young kids or elderly that are taking care of, sort of older parents. And so it's really about reconciling, your health as it evolves over the life course. It also are things around how autonomous you are, depending on the sector you're in. And while we know that older individuals want a lot of flexibility, a survey actually we did with ARP a few years ago showed that only around 40% of older people actually have access to flexibility. And so while it's a topic that has taken full force after COVID-19, especially, countries and employers still struggle how to actually improve the take up. There's still stereotypes. Am I going, for a young, mother or a mid-career person, how will it be seen or perceived if I go on be working from home, or if I'm sort of cutting my from full time to part time? What sort of, will these choices have a penalty in terms of my career progression? And so yes, there's a lot of progress around sort of flexibility in work design. The take up when we see is actually still quite poor, especially around older people. It's also around workplace accommodation. So again, many, as we age, data shows that sort of chronic health also deteriorates. But again, it's not an older Pacific phenomenon. We also see lots of young people with,
Mhm.
one or two multiple chronic conditions in these two age groups. And so it's about what support can we give these individuals to make sure that they're able to carry out their tasks. And here I'm going to sort of, quote a very famous study that you might know, Greg, that BMW in Germany, as they realized 10, 15 years ago that their workforce was aging rapidly, they started to put and change their workflows. They started to adapt their machines. They started to adapt sort of, the font sizes, all sorts of sort of, workplace accommodation that were going to help maintain the tacit knowledge they had put into their workforce. And so you can see that actually there's lots of interesting examples. Um, Unfortunately, still far and few in the private sector, but governments are also giving a lot of support and attention to these issues. So
Mhm.
especially for
Mhm.
SMEs, there's a lot of government support around workplace accommodation. Um, in terms of training, um, this is a sad story. We kind of talk about skills and lifelong learning over and over again, and enormous investments, billions of dollars are going into these systems. But the OECD just recently did another round of our PIAC survey, which we're famous for, which is the survey for adult learning across um, uh, OECD countries and beyond, which still shows that older people are participating in training far below than their prime age and younger counterparts. We're talking participation rates as little as 30%. And
Wow.
so if we were to be imagining our careers and lives, and there's an expectation from governments, from the pension systems that we should all be working up until 67 or even 70, how can we, if we do not have the skills to be able to maintain our own jobs, but also think about job changes, which are quite key as we see AI coming in, technology affecting the labor market, but also climate change, which is rendering some skills altogether and really requiring all of us to be keeping up with our skills changes and demands. So the skill story unfortunately remains rather bleak when it
And
comes
that,
to
as I
older people.
understand too, is not only just by stereotypes of employers, but also part of the kind of narrative or habit of older workers who have more traditionally stayed in one career path, and so they're less it's less common for them to have done skill training through their career, so they're less inclined to take new training or diversify their work trajectory themselves. Did you find data supporting that as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, that and beyond. So we also look at barriers to training. And so it's really both around the supply side, how much training is available, and also about the demand side. And unfortunately, what we do see is that actually um, older workers also do not want to participate. So there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of, I mean, again, these are on average. And of course, there's
Yeah.
huge variations. It's a large heterogeneous group, and it's very important to keep that in mind. Again, it's usually the low-skilled individuals who have multiple barriers. Of course, the high-skilled individuals, high-skilled, and age, they tend to sort of do better than low-skilled. So it's things like training is often badly organized. If we all are working full time, when do we have the time to train? So
Mm.
training,
Yeah.
this, sort of timing of it, when and where does it take place? It's often taken place in classroom settings, which actually not is not always conducive to older individuals, with families. It's about financial resources. Most of the training is actually paid training. Very few countries, a handful in the OECD actually would be giving paid training, leave or paid training. And
Mm.
so financial resources are an enormous barrier to actually take
Yeah.
part. And I think just a final point here, it's about guidance. If we've had a job that, for the last 20, 30 years, I don't even know how to navigate the system, where to go, and what sort of training do I need? And so when we look at the statistics around career guidance, this is again something that has been um, echoed for younger individuals, but very few individuals in the 40s. We can forget about it in your 60s, but even it kind of, declines sharply in mid-career that nobody's even taking part of what sort of guidance or career guidance do I need. But again, it's a fresh area. Not everybody's doing it, but there's enormous recognition and some good examples, like in France, where I am at the moment, the government has a policy called the individual learning account, which really empowers the individual to be able to design their own learning. It's paid credits, regardless of which employer you have. You can change, you can accumulate training rights. And these are very innovative schemes that really try to support this notion of lifelong learning.
Okay. Oh, that's excellent. I wonder, do you just, how about health and safety?
Health and safety. In terms of health and safety, we're looking at a number of things. Of course, data is not available for everything that we would like to look at, but we're generally, again, sort of not all of these dimensions are in the tool, but we know that employment declines enormously with people with health issues, older
Yes,
people
a
with
health
health issues.
shock is the biggest exit from the workforce there is, and we don't have the tools to bring them back, do we?
Absolutely. I mean, again, bit of a mixed picture. Some countries do bit better than others, but on
Mhm.
average, it's sort of, as soon as we get a health shock, and some of these health shocks, we're talking about some temporary um, illnesses which can be um, treated and managed by and supported by the employer, which often are just aren't. And so we very quickly lose these individuals. We're talking about sort of occupational health services, sort of, work accommodation policies. Again, do you have access to sort of, mental health services at the workplace? What sort of sickness absence policies do you have? Do you have a return to work scheme, for instance, supporting individuals? And so it's really about of course, we need prevention and we need good prevention from the health sector per se. But again, I think another interesting area where we're really beginning to sort of scratch the surface. What about the role of prevention of health at the workplace, right? Which is still overlooked. It's a platform where most of us are spending majority of our time, but often health is overlooked, employers and workplace as an agent for preventing
Right.
health but also supporting health as well. And so the OECD, we also have this job quality framework where we look at working conditions, and we use this terminology called the job strain, which is a combination of, let's say, all your bad things. So how much, sort of a strain or lack of autonomy, lack of flexibility, put together with all the resources that you might, be getting from your employers. So if you're strained, if your sort of resources are below the what, sort of the negatives from the workplace, we call this situation a job strain. And around a third of workers across the OECD still experience job strain, even though, of course, sort of physically demanding jobs have been declining.
Mhm.
And so we're talking about sort of a developed world. I mean, of course, there's lots of different sectors, differences, but job strain phenomenon is still huge for these countries. So job quality remains a very, very big issue.
Wow, that is so interesting. And what a loss when you think about very skilled, older workers leaving just because we can't adapt and provide that job quality for them. I mean, it's such a loss to our economies and our societies. I remember a statistic that I read. It was about startup businesses that somebody with a startup business for somebody over the age of 55 has a 70% success rate versus something like a 20% success rate of a startup from somebody, under the age of 30. I
Right.
don't quote me. It's something around those numbers, and it's shocking when you realize what a loss to think that just because we can't adapt a little bit, we're losing such talent and skill to not just for GDP, but just for our societies as a whole. And that kind of leads me into another question. That you've commented a little bit about work through generational stereotypes, and you just mentioned a life course approach. So let's frame that a little bit, but put that life course lens. Well, why do you think that's more an appropriate approach than a generational approach? And then maybe could talk a little bit about when we think about a life course approach, leading that into, a multi-generational workplace, an age diverse organization. Why is that such a competitive advantage? So from the life course to the competitive advantage of a multi-generational workplace.
Yeah, I think, Gregor, the issue is that when we look at generational framing, it just risks that we oversimplify the sort of labor market realities, and it might also reinforce stereotypes. And stereotypes can go both ways. Younger individuals are lazy, they don't turn up to work. And then, similarly, we have older peoples who are not able to adjust to digital technologies, so on and so forth. So I think the risk is sort of, and also it's, I personally find it a bit of a media whammy here, sort of Generation Z, Generation X. The report that
Yeah.
I'd mentioned early on, promoting age inclusive workforce, we tackled this issue in that report, and what we found is that actually there's more likely to be differences within age group rather than across age groups. And so take an example of a 25-year-old who actually has a very precarious job. He or she might be able to relate more to a 55-year-old who's also struggling to get back into the labor market, where they're trying to get hired, compared to, say, another 25-year-old who is working in a tech company and is doing very well. Or again, sort of the caregiving, a young family or younger individual struggling with caregiving, and rearing their younger individual, and comparing that to 45, 55-year-olds. And we also did a survey that looked at what is it that people really look in their jobs, what makes them happy, what makes them satisfied. And across all age groups, every individual wants a job that pays well, it's valued, it gives you flexibility, it's good for your health. The only very slight difference we saw was on a dimension in terms of career progression, where we found that younger people are more likely to want career progression, which is naturally if you're starting off
Of course.
young. That was the only dimension we actually saw a bit of a difference. Otherwise, consistently in every single dimension we looked at across age, there's literally no difference. And so I think these kind of putting different generations together are rather risky. Now, how does the life course narrative fit above this? So what we've seen is that, again, this is work coming from WHO, from the UN, from the OECD, which we consistently have shown that actually inequalities early on in life accumulate over time. And
Mm.
so if we're not able to prevent those inequalities early on, inequalities in health, inequalities in education, they will just accumulate, and worsen. And so, I mean, data shows that people who are lower educated will, over a lifetime, tend to have lower earnings and bad health. And there's also sort of, interrelations between all these dimensions. So we've got to start early on
Mm.
and sort of take a kind of a life course or career perspective, design policies, that are for people that are early on or middle and late, rather than sort of saying, let's do it by age. And so the yes, so I think sort of when we talk about older or younger workers, as if age alone doesn't really explain the outcomes. And I think the risk is that we miss the underlying drivers, things like health, job quality, access to training, working conditions, that are important across all ages than age itself.
Right. Okay. No, makes complete sense. So now so transitioning that into a multi-generational
Right.
workplace. So why is this a competitive advantage? I mean, Yeah, just
Yeah, so we've done some interesting research that where we looked at what happens in companies that are able to combine the skills and the assets of younger and older individuals. What happens to the productivity of these firms? And what
mm,
we found is that across the OECD, so the selected eight countries in which we'd carried out this study, that employers that actually were successfully managed to have a good share of sort of both younger and older individuals had far higher productivity levels than those either had too many older workers or had too many younger individuals. So we had a colleague, well, at ARP, Jeff's colleague, uh, Ramsey, who you might know, is also a big figure, and she used this term called "the magic is in the mix." I think she was spot on. The
mm,
fact that actually the multi-generational, there's so much to learn from each other, both in terms of older workers teaching, passing on their experience through reverse mentorship schemes, but vice versa, where we've seen companies and programs that younger people are teaching older individuals around digital technologies, keeping that, tacit knowledge inside, and also likely to be these teams are also likely to be more innovative. So there's a very strong business case here, both, I mean, at that micro level, but I mean, so that's at the business level, and I have to be honest here. There also at the macro level been a lot of discussion in the past, which has costed governments enormously, where we said that older people are not making space for the younger individuals. So sort of this is 30, 40 years ago
mm,
in the
yeah.
talking about the 70s, countries like the UK, France, and pretty much Europe and the US that said, look, let's just send all these old people to sickness and disability policies because we need to make room for the younger individuals. This was the total policy flop and the biggest failure that has taken years for governments to actually get over. And I get invited to events. We call it the lump of labor fallacy. The reality is the labor market is a very dynamic place. Jobs are created and destroyed every day. And this notion of that older people are taking away jobs from younger individuals is not true. Um, at least not in any of the recent evidence that I've seen and the past work that we've done at the OECD. But again, I think it's an area in certain countries, for instance, parts of Europe, sort of Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, where youth unemployment is very, very, very high. So these issues are politically difficult. Sort of,
Mm.
how do we give opportunities to both young and older individuals? But so you can see both. I mean, at the private sector, we have strong evidence that actually mixed age teams, that sort of mixed workforces are very good. But then at the macro level, there are these tensions around older versus younger individuals, who's taking jobs, promotions, so on and so forth.
It makes me think of one of the other fallacies is that older people are cannot adapt or are really not suited for technology, which we know is completely untrue. In fact, generative AI, we talk about that older people are really actually generative AI is actually their older people are far more suited to work with AI, just because of the maturity and the ability to design better prompts and engage with generative AI in a much more compelling and effective way. But what do you think? What do you think about AI and changing the experience of older workers, maybe for the positive and the negative? Any?
Yeah, I mean it's a hot topic, and of course we're looking at it. There's a tons of work at the OECD that is going into studying AI, its impacts, ethics around it, whether it's good or bad. And I must say the research related to aging is still very underexplored. I mean, I
Mm,
think we don't have enough data, at least sort of, to be able to measure and look at what sort of, real impacts it can have for older people. But on average, what we do know is that AI is expected to change sort of the tasks of work, around 28 and 28 to 30% of jobs, will be changed as a result of AI. So these are significant changes. There's a lot of speculation around when it comes to that. On one hand, it can be rather disruptive. I think it really depends on how firms will embrace it, to the amount of investment we would do in training individuals, especially older people. We know there's inequalities to begin with. And how do we ensure that actually older people have the even basic skills? In some countries, again, um, you might even lack sort of very basic digital skills on how to even operate a computer, right? So before we can even discuss AI, what skills are needed for AI, there's a lot of work to be done by governments and institutions like ours to be able to kind of level up the sort of the playing field when it comes to training. But I think it's we see some good examples, in Japan, where we see that older people are already working up until their 70s. If you look at the health sector, very interesting technologies being introduced to lower the physical workloads that might be typically be done by older women and men, especially in the sort of, healthcare sector, as you can imagine. So there's a lot of, some firm level evidence showing that actually, on one hand, it can really improve job quality for certain individuals. And I think we really need to be able to document these and kind of understand, what adoption looks like, in firms. Is it really, able to improve job quality? And if so, why? And what else might be needed to ensure that AI, in combination with some of the other policies, is being effective? But at the
Mhm.
same time, there are lots of, concerns. And one example I can give you is around sort of discrimination. Sort of, AI and, is being used in selecting, and hiring candidates.
Yeah, yeah,
And
bias.
if you have somebody behind you that's actually already has some stereotypes in their head, programmers, who are creating these algorithms, they can only reinforce these. And so I think it's important that we continue to rely on sort of, human competencies, skill to interpret these results, make sure that we have, carefully understand the sort of the ethics around it. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, and unfortunately, it's an area that's moving faster than we would like.
Well, that's it.
Research is struggling to keep up.
All of our, all policy, equity, safety, data, who owns data, bias, and we can't, it's going so fast, and governments are just, we cannot keep up. I mean, yeah, it's, and,
I tell you what, we had a lady from L'Oreal. She is the chief inclusion officer at the launch of the tool last week, and she told us something really interesting that at least the older employees working in L'Oreal are actually better. Sort of, they're training themselves in AI all the time. They're actually better in training it because I suppose maybe there's more fear or whatever around, how to do it than the younger individuals. So again, this, sort of stereotypes that some older people can and others can't. I mean, she said that actually she found that workers sort of in their 50s were teaching themselves, on a daily
Mhm.
basis, without
Interesting,
even
interesting.
any interventions. But again, I mean, lots of interesting work happening across the governments on how to ensure, embed AI as a part of training curriculum, which is a big thing right now. So any training that is being designed, should have some sort of an AI curriculum as part of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's touch base on that a little bit too. I mean, I noticed even Cynthia Stewin has made a comment in the chat, and I have a question here around ageism. I mean, it's still so, it seems to me, still so prevalent in the workplace as a form of discrimination. Why do you think why is it just so difficult to confront it? Well,
Well, it's difficult to confront it, partly because it's very difficult to prove and it's very difficult to measure.
hmm,
It's often hidden. And so inherently the way it's looked at, the way it's measured, the way, it comes about, um, it makes data gathering very, very difficult. And also, I mean, very difficult to prove it, as we know, court systems, the judicial system, very lengthy, very costly. And so when you look at these kind of so as a package, so proving it becomes very, very difficult. But I agree. I think it's one policy area that probably hasn't changed very much in the last 30, 40 decade. I think the views and attitudes towards older people still at large remain just as they were, 50 years ago. It's
Mm,
incredible.
mm,
We did a survey asking employers 2, 3 years ago on how likely you are to hire somebody from the age group of 25 to 35 and something in the middle, 45 to 55. Then we had 55 to sort of 65 for entry-level positions. 70% employers said they're unlikely to hire somebody from the 55 to a
mm,
65 age group in an entry-level job. And when we look at statistics in terms of new hirings as a total hires in the economy, older people just make around 8% on average in the OECD.
mm,
So yes, when they do have a job, they tend to stay longer, which is great. But if they find themselves in a situation where they need to look for a new job and get back to the labor market, this is a lost game. It's
mm,
one of the biggest struggles that we have in policy
mm.
making. No country has sort of, you know, kind of nailed the issue in terms of
Cracked the nut
how
on the.
crack the nut. How do we get older people back to the labor market? And that's because of
Yeah,
age discrimination. They do all
yeah.
sorts of programs. They give them training. They give them, I don't know, you name it, all the wraparound services you can imagine. And still, we will have costly wage subsidies. They might, you might get, employers to hire older individuals, through wage subsidies, but then we know there's lots of,
Mm,
pros and
mm.
cons to that as well. Um, but there is more and more research, but not enough. And I hope, my sincere hope is that, it will change through these conversations and over time. And I think at some point businesses would realize they have no choice.
Well,
It
that's
might
it.
just I
Mm.
think that's the only way they realize that, their talent pools are shrinking so much and so rapidly that you
Yeah, Europe and Central Asia, what was it? It could lose 10 million workers over the next 15 years. I mean, it's astounding. Well, maybe just moving into a few. We've got lots of comments coming in here from friends from around the world. Mark Venning from here in Canada, he says, to support and enhance this conversation, I suggest this book, The Talent Revolution: Longevity and the Future of Work by Canadian author Lisa Taylor, and he's popped the link in there. And he also offers a question. He says, from your research, what advantages do small businesses have over larger organizations in terms of leveraging this longevity benefit?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to be honest, we haven't looked at sort of, the size of business. None of the research has been in this area for large businesses, but we know that for SMEs that, I mean, it's interesting when I speak to some of the German employers, these are often small run, family owned businesses. Or if you go to Japan, for instance, right? Um, these individuals tend to value retaining mid-career and older people way more when we go to sort of the Anglo-Saxons, to the Americans, to the British. And so there are these kind of, institutional differences, cultural differences that might explain. So I'm not sure if it really quite answers, Mark, your question, but I think that's some anecdotal evidence that I have in terms of firm size. A lot of the German employers are small and medium enterprises, and they really tend to be valuing this. But then again, you have a lot of constraints in these some SMEs. They don't have the capacity to hire sometimes very expensive older people, which is something we haven't spoken about, Gregor. The seniority wages. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
just. I mean, one of
Yes,
the
that's it.
it's not just stereotypes. It's actually another huge perception around older workers are costly, and we can hire somebody younger. Right? This is a huge debate, a difficult one. Um, and so, I wonder, so the whole,
Mark, I don't know. Mark, you're there. Would you like to comment on this directly? Do you have a specific sort of thought or idea from your insight and research?
Well, it just strikes me that smaller companies, not necessarily SMEs, but just small businesses, could be 50 people. They don't think of themselves as an SME, that they are more close to their people. And so they have a better advantage to recognize the longevity benefit, as I'd like to call it. So maybe there's maybe more research to be done there. And I think Canada is it not an OECD country? We
it is,
we
yes.
could participate in that.
Absolutely. But I think markets, you're right. It's about knowing your workforce. I think that cultural dimension is a huge part of it. It's not just the economics, it's the relations. And I think this is why I was sort of talking about Germany, because these are not necessarily small, businesses, but these are family run who value long-standing staff, so on and so forth. And again, in Japan. Um, but again, I think probably large differences in sectors, right? If we take the IT sector, I'm not sure, what the attitudes would be compared to, hospitality or let's say manufacturing, where you really value the experience of older individuals. But yeah, interesting question. And yes,
Interesting.
I
Yeah.
agree, more needs to be done.
Chris Kobus asks, is there any data on how many older adults would like to remain in the workforce if their workplace were to make accommodations? Yeah, that's a great question. Do we actually know how many would actually like to keep working if there was a flexible workplace?
Um, I don't have a number on top of me, but in Japan, they did a survey around how long you would like to work up to, and people basically came up to around the age of 80. My recollection from all of these surveys is that most individuals want to work as long as they can. Um, and especially so if we are given more flexibility. So it's again, lots of discussions, debate, stories around, well, actually, do older people, want to work longer or not? I mean, again,
Mhm, mhm,
depends
mhm.
on your skill, what sort of workers are we talking to when you talk to sort of most, I don't know, I think many of us here, if we had the chance and some flexibility, yeah, why not? Let's continue in a part-time way. I have lots of skills, but then, if you're talking to a train driver or a bus driver, who might have accumulated lots of health issues, during their sort of working career, and you're asking them to, how long you want to work, would you be willing to work for another 10 years? I think it's a different question. So it's a heterogeneous group. I think we cannot speak just in a
Yeah,
generalized
that's right.
way around these topics, around, or around who wants to work longer and how. I think these are very complex issues, which we're facing, governments are facing when you're designing pension systems, right? Should we be opposing 70 to everybody? Should there be separate pension schemes, for people working in more arduous jobs? And so, how do we compensate people who are working in bad quality jobs? It's a messy area. And I think we just can't generalize it.
Tina Agrill notes, she says, at one point to make economies, engineers were encouraged en masse to take the early retirement package. Heard that before. And as a result, everyone left. So they left taking all their skills and experience. So new young engineers had no hands-on experience on the shop floor, and often the retired older people were employed at great expense as consultants. So they have to bring them back as consultants at huge expense to the company.
Yeah, great example.
Yeah. And then just down here also from Shelley de la Vega, do older people need a fit for work health screen prior to their return to employment? Is there some way that, I mean, gosh, even from an insurance point of view, as an employer, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting area, and then lots of differences in countries. I can just give you an example from my home country, the UK, where it used to be called a sick note, and you can imagine the kind of thoughts and narrative a sick note has compared to a fit note. It took about 20, 30 years to move from a sick note, which meant employers don't want these workers back. And also individuals feel that they are sick and they can't go back. And they moved to fit note. And it's it's not that, yes, I mean, I'm not sure if the question, what you mean by the question, you need a fit note. Yes, I mean, a person needs to be healthy to be able to go back to work. But when do you decide if somebody's healthy or not? Um, Very interesting area in sickness policy in the UK 20 or even 15 years ago. If you hurt your ankle, you might be out of work for a year. There are no guidelines for doctors to tell you, actually, an ankle could be healed in 3 months and you'll be back at work. And so the government did enormous amount of works with doctors to put together these NICE guidelines to sort of, estimate how much an illness might sort of take, or how much you need to recover, which was good both for the individuals and also the employers that's waiting for the individuals to come back. And so yes, I mean, in principle, you need to be fit if that's kind of a simple question. But like I said, it's not an easy area because how you define fit could be quite
Yeah,
complex.
well, and Shmuel offers up, do you think we should be encouraging older people to return to stay to work or return to work? Is that something that you feel we should do, or is it just, it's really up to the individual? I mean, we know some individuals, especially in low and middle income countries, they have no choice. It's
Yeah, that's
not
right.
really a choice. They have to
Yes.
work to, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And I think the problem that we have is actually that we have too many perhaps, barriers in the West. Um, so it's about choice. Many countries still have mandatory retirement ages. We still sort of have systems where training runs out at the age of 55 and people aren't, eligible for these schemes, so on and so forth. So I think the challenge for, this part of the world is it's really about giving people the choice to be able to work longer if they can,
Mm.
contrary to, let's say, the developing world where people have no choice but to work, right? It's choice is defined in different, I think choice, how I say choice for us is different to Gregor, you use the word choice for developing world.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Fair enough. I think I'm grasping the question from Eileen here. And Eileen, please feel free to help me articulate your question. You feel free to jump on. But she's asking, what is the current policy amongst EU funding policies, e.g. Erasmus? The policy used to be, or still is, that only for the working age, which define those under state pension age. I'm not sure. Do you understand? Or Eileen, can you help clarify
I
that?
have no idea. I cannot answer this question. It's very specific around Rasmus. I have no idea. I'd love to look it
Well,
up. I
thank you
don't
very
know.
much, Gregor. And listen, thank you very, very much for an excellent input. And you have answered the question there in about two sentences or a few sentences ago, where you said people aren't eligible for training over a certain age. I think within Europe, they stop all the statistics at say age 65, and after that you're bundled together. So you
Right.
That's
have
right.
motherhood, and I call it an apple pie statement, lifelong learning. And then you have programs that are lifelong learning geared towards may adult who are not in the workplace. So it's this whole definition. But I think the OECD, UNESCO, and everybody needs to change their themselves first before going out to other countries. Um, And I love the idea that you have for France, in which you keep your own individual learning accounts. I'm with the University of Third Age, and it started in France based on the 1960s government that universities had to link with older people. So thank you very much. Does that make sense to you, or am I on the wrong track altogether? Thank you, Gregor.
No, it sounds great. And I think, I think, dare I say, from here at the WHO headquarters, we have to change our policies. We still have premature death at age 70, premature mortality age 70. I mean, gosh, we got to change this. So if a person born in Europe today has a 50% chance of living to 100, and there's no reason why someone can't work well into their 70s. And yet we still have these antiquated policies like that. So yes, Eileen, I'm with you, uh, Shruti.
Yeah, and I think the data point is a very good one. By the way, we're not coming up with statistics. We're collecting statistics from member countries. And, this is something that I do. It comes up more and more that we need to be collecting statistics um, beyond 65. I mean, it's a joke. We have at least half of the OECD countries that have increased the pension age up to 70, yet we collect no data of how these people are doing in terms of, their labor force participation or skills and training. And so it's a clear sort of an error in
Yeah.
parts of institutions that are making these policy changes and designing them. And so data concern, Eileen, is a very good one. And I really hope that countries would be getting better in this.
Well, Shruti and all, we're coming to the end of our session here, and gosh, we just feel like we just started the conversation. We could spend all weekend talking through so many of these ideas. I'm gonna just wrap up with a few words here, but I'm gonna let you have the last word, Shruti, and I want, if you would, just think about as a final question, if you could redesign one workplace norm or system for the longevity era, what would you change first? What's the first thing we need to get right and change? So just maybe have a little think on that. And before we close, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, not only today, but for your ongoing engagement across our Global Cafe series. You'll have noted too that we've just launched the IFA's new strategic plan. You can see it online and invite you to download it, have a look. We're really excited here at the IFA, and we'll be launching our revised membership plan over the coming days. So please stay tuned. As we continue the Global Cafe series, we invite you to join us next month for a discussion on investing in planetary health and climate resilience for longevity. That's going to be a really interesting conversation. I just met yesterday with the ambassador for Mauritius here in Geneva, and as a small island nation, just wow, it's very fascinating discussion. Looking forward to that. We've heard from many of our members that they wish to have more space to exchange ideas and connect. So, as noted earlier on, we invite IFA members to stay on to continue the conversation today, share reflections, and engage informally. Shruti, you're most welcome to stay and join us if you wish. And if you're not yet an IFA member but would like to learn more, please contact us at membership@ifa.ngo, and we'll pop that into the chat. So we thank you again for being part of the IFA Global community, and we hope to see you at the next cafe on June 11th. And before we transition into our member chat, back to you, Shruti, for your last word. What do you think, if you could redesign one workplace norm or system change for the longevity era, what would you change first?
I think I'd redesign the assumption that careers should be linear and front loaded. So it's really about viewing careers not as a ladder, but more as evolving portfolios, roles, and skills, and health and transitions, and facilitating those transitions in different periods of our life. And so I think that's something we've got to change, not only because of the labor market is structurally changing, but because we change and we evolve over time, and what we want and when we started off in our early 20s or 30s might change when we're in our 50s, 60s. The job that we've had and we've loved, we might loathe it by the end of it. So it's really about whether it's out of force or choice, people need to be able to have those transitions throughout their lives. So I think, so that's something that I'd like to all of you to take away, making it all very much more fluid than what we started off. And I think this is really key and important for all of our prosperity.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shruti, for being with us today and the amazing work you're doing at OECD and with so many of us. You're such great collaborators as we work together as a community. Because as you know, it's none of us alone are going to be able to solve how we're going to navigate this triumph of humanity of our aging populations and the tremendous opportunity. And so it's just amazing to have people like you as leading the discussion and the engagement globally. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Gregor. And I really enjoyed the talk and also to speaking in front of a very different set of stakeholders to the OECD. And please feel free to look at our work. It's all free, it's online. And feel free to get in touch bilaterally if you need to. It was a really great pleasure. Thank you for making it fun and interesting.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Okay.
That concludes our Global Cafe for today. And if you wish to stay on and chat, please do.